And we are live. Hi, welcome to Badass College Apps with Admissions Mom. I'm Carolyn, where we talk about applying to college and then we stop and take a breath. I'm so excited again to have Nick Accrocco with me for the second week in a row. I feel so honored. Thank you so much, Nick. And the reason why I'm especially excited today is because we're talking about letters of recommendation. And Nick actually taught the class that I took about letters of recommendation at Rice, and so learned a ton. And he is going to be able to share so much information with you. Plus, I know from personal experience, he is a letter of recommendation writer extraordinaire. And so I'm happy to have students and possibly even teachers and parents and anyone who's out there, whether you're here with us now or in the future. Super excited to have you. And we have Nathaniel again. Yay, Nathaniel. Thank you so much for being here again. And Nathaniel, I know that you have finished the college admissions process and experience, but love your wisdom, love your advice that you give people, and feel free to chime in with your thoughts about letters of recommendation. So thanks for being here. The rest of you, feel free to say hi. We'd love to see you and say hi, and feel free to jump on with your questions. So Nick, I'm going to give you a minute to introduce yourself in case people didn't get to see you last week when we were talking about making your decision. So tell us who you are, what you do, how they can find you if they want to find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello, everyone. My name is Nick Accrocco, and I've been doing college admissions in some form or another for the better part of 20 years. And I find that when I think back on my own college search, I was just a nervous wreck. I was in my college counselor's office all the time. I've talked about this. And then what I realized is, like many admissions officers, we started off as a tour guide. So I was a tour guide at Vanderbilt, my alma mater. Eventually worked at admissions there and also the University of Pennsylvania within the Ivy League. And then I ended up actually working at the school where Carolyn's two younger children went to. And her youngest was actually in my homeroom advisement. So worked there, worked at a school called Ranny School, about an hour south of New York City on the East Coast. Currently, I'm director of college counseling at the Summit Country Day School in Cincinnati, Ohio. But also, as Carolyn mentioned, I've taught college counseling courses at Rice online even before the pandemic, which I feel like I say something about that every hour. So happy to be here tonight. Happy to help with any questions that you might have. I think a lot of times letters of recommendation can be a topic that gives a lot of anxiety because it's part of the application process where you don't really know what the counselor or the teachers are saying. But we're going to talk about exactly what that looks like and reassure you that you have nothing to worry about and give you some tips on how to get really good letters of recommendation.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. And thank you for being here again with us, Nick. Really appreciate it. As I said, my name is Carolyn. I also go by Admissions Mom. You can find me on Reddit on Are Applying to College. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter sometimes and on Discord now. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions, and feel free. Also, I can connect you with Nick if you want to reach out to him and figure out a way to get questions answered from him later too. So thank you so much. We're going to kind of just start jumping right into these letters of recommendation. Nick, I want to just start off before I open up my slides to talk about just, do you have any main talking points you want to make sure we address, kind of an overall viewpoint about letters of recommendation?
I will say it's very easy to overthink them.
Okay.
I think people, I should say students, they wonder, what's the teacher going to say? Who should I ask? Does it have to be a math teacher, a STEM teacher, or like a humanities teacher? Or what if I'm an engineer and want to be, when I have a science teacher and a math teacher?
Mm-hmm.
How about extra layers of recommendation? Like, what does that look like? Is more better? So those are kind of like some of I think the anxieties is kind of percolate. But what I would say is that, I mean, if I've read 7,000 applications for admission, which is my rough estimate, and each of those had roughly 3 layers of recommendation, I have read 21,000 letters of recommendation, and I can count on how many of them were negative. So we're going to talk a little bit about who to pick, how to exactly how to kind of advise them. Some high schools have a formal system where there's as I always say, the cleverly titled teacher recommendation form. It's so exciting. But those questions, the one I use at the high school I work at, it actually was created with faculty input. So I remember one teacher said, I really want to know, like, of all the teachers that the student had, why me? Why they picked me? What Uh, and so we'll talk a little bit about exactly how to fill those forms out, because I can tell you, as someone who's had to write tons and tons of counselor letters, giving your rec writer content, this is what I want you to focus on, this is what I want you to do, they're not going to take offense to that. They're going to be like, okay, thank you, that's great. And I had no idea that was the most inspiring lesson you ever had. So
Yeah, that's great. And what you just said a second ago about the teacher saying that they wanted to know, like, why you picked me. I think that really struck me when I was taking your class. And that was something that I definitely took to heart. And you'll see that I probably mentioned it in the slides, unless I accidentally took it out. But it really, it's something I always talk to my students about too. When I'm talking to them, I'm like, why are you picking this teacher? And they want to know why. So make sure that that's really clear. And I thought that was an amazing point. And that wasn't something that I had really thought about before I took your class. So that was great. All right, let's just jump in. And this will give us our talking points as we go through. As always, feel free to interrupt, disagree, agree, and move on. We won't, go through them bit by bit. Students, if you have questions, or those of you out there, whoever you are, if you have questions, please feel free to ask, jump in, give your opinion, clarify. It's all good. We're all just here to learn. Me too. All right. So talking about letters of recommendation, this is part one. This was such a long slideshow that I had to divide it into two parts. Okay. So basically, what are letters of recommendation? For those of you who are complete newbie babies to college admissions, basically, they're just letters other people write about you, usually from a teacher and a counselor, and they add to who you are. And it gives them a way to get to know you in a little bit of a different way. Anything to add to that, Nick?
yeah, I would say that basically, there's kind of two sort of questions the dean's going to have in committee. So the counselor letter of recommendation, that's, to use the famous admission word, holistic. They're going to background, extracurriculars, any sort of anecdotes that came during your time in high school. When it comes to the faculty, what the dean is going to ask the officer is, what are faculty saying about them in the classroom? So want to be her lab partner, or maybe this student doesn't speak up very often, but when they do, everybody listens. Or I once had a math teacher write, I grade his test first and use that as an answer key to grade the other papers. So little kind of quirky things like that. Now, what you also might take into consideration is one of the things that we have to fill out as a college counselor is called the school report. And that sounds really serious and scary and all that, but it really is basically, what's your grading scale, are service hours required, what's your title. But one of the questions that they really take notice of is, how many students are in your caseload? So I have 50 students, which is actually kind of on the high end for a private school currently in every graduating class. But I mean, I've usually have had about 36, 37, roughly thereabouts. So when they see that it's a well-resourced high school and that the caseload's really small, my letter better sing. There's an expectation there. But let's say you're at a high school and the counselor says, I've got 1,000 students.
Right.
Their expectations about her or him or her writing a letter, about 1,000 students, that's not an expectation. But however, they will lean more heavily on those teacher recommendations to just get an idea as to, what you're like in the community. And when we talk about who to pick and why, we'll give you some considerations with that. But, basically, long story short, they do take notice of what's this high school environment,
Yeah. That's great. For sure. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty. So you kind of mentioned the different types of letters of recommendation. So actually, this is not the types. I was doing my slides too quickly, but this is what letters of recommendation provide: insight about the students and what they're like in the community, firsthand accounts of, and this, I think you alluded to all this, firsthand accounts of students' academic abilities and character. So from the teacher's perspective, challenges that they might have within the classroom that they've overcome, their study habits, their intellectual curiosity. I think loving those little details that you mentioned earlier, and then special circumstances. So if you have special circumstances in your life that the teachers might need to discuss. So I'm going to move on, and maybe we'll get to the types in the next one. I just have those titles mixed up. Okay, so this is the types of letters of recommendation: the school or college counselor letter, academic teacher letter, and supplemental letters. So talk to me a little bit about, you said that school or college counselor letter is the holistic letter where they talk about, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as a college counselor who has to write these myself, what we're trying to do is there's a couple of different techniques to do this, but I sit there and I think, okay, what would be my argument to committee as a former admissions officer as to why this student should be admitted? And the other thing too is one of my colleagues, she's had this great line. She says, "We write about you on your best day."
Mm-hmm.
Have more of those than others, but nonetheless, it is like it's my advocacy. And what I try to do as a former officer is that you try to anticipate what committee might object to or push about. And so I try to give the officer, like, okay, when they say this, say that. Now I don't literally write when they say this, say that, but I'm giving them that context so that if they do have an issue with a slightly lower sophomore year or what have you, here's the context of that. Now we have this gargantuan survey that has taken many forms and evolved over the years, and the first 20 questions I ask are really just quick, like nuts and bolts stuff. What's your favorite TV show? What's your favorite band? What's your favorite sports team? And inevitably, there's one thing you can connect with a student about on those. But then we also ask them about, stories about them. Like, if you had to ask your friends one story that was like so you, what would that story be? And so you get a lot of different, kind of context about that. And I'd also say for anyone who's thinking about being a college counselor, the advice my own college counselor gave when I asked her doing it, she says, get to know your students as people.
Mm-hmm.
So powerful when writing these letters and saying, like, hey, when I talk to the student, this is what happens, and this is what I've learned from them and my observations. So
yeah, and I want to, for the students out there, is there anything they can do for the college counselor to like get to know the college counselor? Let's say they are in one of those schools where there's 1,000 kids for a counselor, not even a college counselor. So what can they do to kind of like help their college counselor?
that's a great question. And I would say just come in and hang out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, really interesting when I went to the high school side, and that was the first year that Carol and I met. Like, I realized that maybe I was just a cool new teacher, but like students would just come during like a free period and just hang out, and we weren't talking about essays or how to get in or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Even the ones who got in like early decision in the fall sometimes would just come by and say hi. But that's what I would say is, like, make yourself like known to them, and ask them questions, and just sort of talk. Like, I also try on the flip side, like, I try to do classroom observations to not only
Mm-hmm.
teachers teach and like, is this the right type of teacher for this student, but also I want to see the students in action. And sometimes I get great rec letter fodder. I'm like, you should have seen how he defended this in history class, blah blah blah, like that. So that's another great thing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. I think for those of you who go to large high schools where your counselors they do more than just college counseling. They also do school counseling and they help students in all sorts of issues. I don't think you're not going to be able to expect the counselor to be able to just sit and hang out with you all the time. Even if they want to, they're just probably not going to be able to. However, I do encourage you to go and introduce yourself and at least make an effort to say hello and just wanted to introduce myself and let you know that I'm here. And, I'd love to meet with you or make an appointment, for just 15 minutes. So putting a face to your name can help a lot. Obviously, every school has a slightly different situation. Every counselor has their own issues and non-issues. So you have to take yours at face value. Um, but I think also, like Nick said, if there's no way your counselor can get to know you, don't stress out about that too much because the schools are very aware. They know that. They've seen your school profile and they understand that. And that's why the next level, the teacher recommendations, as Nick said, becomes so important. And I'm going to throw up what Nathaniel said about these teacher recommendations because it's so right. And I know we'll be talking a little bit more about this. But Nathaniel's talking about the teacher recommendation. He said the personal anecdotes and the brag sheets, I actually call them cheat sheets, but whichever way you want to do it, are like A1. They give the admissions officers a picture view of the student. Their examples of actions speak louder than words. And this is what's really true. It takes the pressure off the teacher to think of all those anecdotes because they have a lot of students and they have to remember everything. So it makes things easier and it helps you craft your application in the way you want, right? Like if you're thinking about your brand kind of in a way, or like what you're trying to sell about yourself, you can highlight that with your teachers too. And those are great points, Nathaniel. So Nick, so the academic teacher, then I think Nathaniel brings up these great points. What do you think? What are you looking for as the college counselor who reads probably from your teachers and also as a former admissions officer? What are you looking for from the teacher recommendations?
So great question. So there's a wonderful free resource. It's almost 10 years old at this point, if maybe older, but still kind of timeless. So if you just go on YouTube, Vanderbilt's Guide to Letters of Recommendation, the dean, Doug Christiansen, my former dean, he gives a wonderful presentation just talking about what they're looking for in the letters. But when I work with my actual faculty, so I say to them, okay, think about what they already have in the transcript. I know what their GPA is. I read that 3 pages ago. I know he's captain of the soccer team. I read that 2 pages after that. I know that he's challenged himself in his courses. What I'm looking for is as captain of the soccer team or as one of the best, history students we ever had or what have you. So, I think Nathaniel's hit it right in the head. Like I often say, it sounds ironic, but adjectives or descriptive words, they don't really say much, He's so hard, as evidenced by what?
Right.
So, and when I work with faculty, I say anecdotes and stories. Tell me what he did in the class. Tell me how he struggled, but he overcame it. Tell me how, he would help his peers, with homework, like that kind of stuff. So you're looking for that. And I'd also say students, so when we talk to the actual students at my high school that I'm at right now, we say, okay, who are you going to ask for letters of recommendation? Now, if you tell me 2 junior year teachers, done, we're done. Great, awesome. But sometimes it might be, well, they taught me 10th grade and they're going to teach me 12th grade and they were my homeroom advisor or they were my coach or what have you. What I run into, and I tell my students this all the time, is there's every single year, there's one student who digs in their heels and says, you don't understand. I have to have my 7th grade teacher right. She's my second. And they don't want to hear from your 7th grade teacher. They want to hear from your junior teachers. So it's a full instruction. The other thing I'll tell students is it doesn't have to be the teacher who gave you an A. Like, I don't think that actually really doesn't come, that never came into my mind when I was reading. I had colleagues who kind of did, but it wasn't like, well, how this teacher didn't give them a good grade. Like, a lot of the best letters, and you hear this all the time, are from the teacher where you struggled in their class. Great stories, And I mean, like I remember, like I had a teacher when I was in high school who absolutely just kicked my butt, and I struggled at first, but I sort of figured it out, So like those are good stories. So don't be afraid if it's not the A teacher or what have you.
Good advice. Do you recommend that students get a letter of recommendation from a teacher in the academic major they might be moving towards, or in somewhere something related?
Yes, but I also think that too much can be made of this. But let me put it this way: like, if you're applying for engineering, my eyes immediately go math and science. So I think it's totally acceptable to have a math teacher and a science teacher. In those cases, there's some places, there's very few, but it's out there in the ether. Like people think it's a little bit more prevalent that it has to be like a humanities teacher and it has to be like a STEM teacher. And
MIT.
Right, right, exactly. That's a good example.
But not every school. I think MIT is the one I know of for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not something that comes up too terribly often. We'll talk about like extra letters, as well. But if you're trying to major in Spanish and there's not a rec letter from Senora, I'm confused.
Right.
That's pretty obvious too. Same thing with like, if you're going to be like a visual artist or a performing artist, like I want to hear from the choir teacher, I want to hear from the art teacher. But it's weird. It's not something I paid too terribly much attention to, but I did find it odd when, again, they were like majoring in a foreign language and there's not a letter from, that teacher like that.
Yeah, that's a good thought. So Nathaniel's got a point here, just backing up what you said about the grades. One of mine was from a teacher who gave me a B, and I think it was a really good letter. Yeah, I think probably so, because it probably showed your growth and how you handled, problems and your resilience. So I think those are important aspects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you alluded to the supplemental letters of recommendation, which are the third category on here. Tell us what that is. And actually want to go back to a question. When you said if somebody's going to be majoring in a fine art or a performing art or something, that they should get a letter of recommendation as an academic letter of recommendation from one of those teachers, or as a supplemental letter?
Either or both. But
Okay.
art schools are going to expect to hear from the art teacher, and that's the thing is like the students who really, this isn't like I do art on the side and want to submit an extra portfolio, which is a whole nother thing.
Right.
I want to go to an art school. I want to do this. I want to do that. They probably, I wouldn't be surprised if some schools are asking explicitly for that.
Okay. All right.
But, so, which is also a perfect segue to supplemental letters. So,
Right.
remember when I was reading applications and they were still paper files, I picked up, because now everyone pretty much reads online. But when we used to print them out, I picked up this one file and I said to my coworker, "Why is this so heavy? Why is this so heavy?" All right, and there were 9 letters of recommendation.
Oh my.
One from mom, who had very positive things to say about her daughter. Said some line like, "She's just as comfortable in a local diner as she is at a 5-star restaurant in the Eiffel Tower." I mean, that I remember that. So I thought that was
That's with you.
yeah. So here, students, I would say this: it's pretty easy to find, 9 adults or more. I think the record I ever heard was at Chapel Hill, which was like 86, I believe. And no, they did not get in. But it's not that hard to find that many adults. So here's what I would say. So if you're like, you get one from your counselor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, if your high school's too big and they can't give you one, like that's okay. But then you get 2 from academic teachers. Generally speaking, there are places that will take 1, but many
Mm-hmm.
2. And then if you had another, so you could have like science teacher, English teacher, and then art teacher if you were really into art or performing arts, or a coach, or
Right.
you're on some like student government thing with the principal and they want to talk about it, or an employer, or you're a clergyman, or that stuff is fine too. I try to tell my students no more than 5.
Okay.
Carol and I were talking about this earlier. We have an expression in my office: it's an application, not a campaign. So
Yeah.
you don't want to have too terribly many. Can you still get in? Sure, but they're not looking for it, and frankly they're only asking for 3. Why do you need 8?
Right. I recommend that my students have no more than 1 or 2 supplemental letters of recommendation. I think beyond that, it's like, what else are they going to add about you? Now, I will say that if colleges are accepting them, early on in the beginning, and they take 2, then okay, if you want to get 2, great. But I would hold back on some others that might add a different dimension to who you are in case you're waitlisted or deferred, and then they take letters of recommendation. And so that can sometimes be a time to add a supplemental letter of recommendation that shows a different aspect of who you are, or maybe even from a different classroom. Not every college does accept them, but quite a few do for that. Okay, so let's move on and see if I got the titles wrong on the next one. I think we've already kind of addressed this. So you're going to need the 3 to be prepared for. Now, there might be some of you out there applying to colleges that don't require any academic letters of recommendation. There are definitely colleges for that. And I'm just going to give a note to those of you here. If you're like, there is no way I'm going to be able to get a letter of recommendation, like seriously, no way, I don't want to do it. You can sort for that on Common App. I don't recommend it. I recommend that you go through the kind of the routine of asking for it and, talking about it and thinking about it, but you can sort for it and actually apply to college with no letters of recommendation, except for maybe the counselor one. Okay, so this is where we're going to kind of get more into the nitty gritty. And I think we might have already done here. And so I'm not sure about this one, but I'm going to actually see if I can open this. The whole like brag sheet thing. And let me see if nope, I can't. So I'm going to go back to there. So what kind of things would you want to make sure that the students address on the counselor letter
That's
when they're talking to the counselor?
So that's a great question. So what I if so we do we do the actual written survey, and I like to refer to that in the first junior meeting, which is typically spring semester. Uh,
Hmm.
I did almost all my junior meetings in February, and you go, oh, like I saw you that you did this, or I saw these were your summer plans, or what have you, and that's a great way to build rapport. Um, but if there's not a survey or something, and you do go to your counselor, regardless of how big their caseload is, I mean, what I usually ask is, and what I would say is, this, students is flip the script here. But I usually ask, what are three things you want this college to know about you?
Hmm.
Um, and then I'll also kind of ask, like, it's also really interesting too, and I found this at quite literally every high school I work at. I'll say, okay, so what do you do for community service? What do you do for sports? What do you do for art? Because I'm amazed sometimes how students forget entire categories,
Right.
stuff that they did. And now here's the thing, this is a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. They're not looking for a checklist of different types of activities, but I sometimes, like, I've had students where they'll give me their activity sheet and they don't realize that all the amazing things they do outside of school also. And I'm like, oh, you're not really involved. But then I find out they have a part-time job 20 hours a week. I mean, that's cool, you know. um,
Right.
so anyway, so you want to tell them, like as a college counselor, I would say to students, like, how can I advocate you the best for you the best? Like, what sort of things do you absolutely want them to know? If there was one thing, and we do it with parents too, you know. So when I was working with Carolyn, when she was one of my moms, so to speak, um,
Hmm.
well, a parent perspective, and like, tell us about your child. And so sometimes you get some real gold with that. We had one student I'll never forget. In their parent perspective, the parents said when she was little, she taught herself how to tie her shoes, and we called her the girl who teaches herself things. And I'm like, oh, that's gold. All right, that's going in the letter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really key. And if you're watching this, you will have access to these slides once I've corrected them. And there is that link to a sample brag sheet. That's actually a variation of the one that I used for my own children and that my kids used in their high school, with a few additions and a few subtractions, but it's a variation of that. And you can use that. And I think we need to stop here and say for a second, though, to be sure and find out whether your school has their own brag sheet. Um, find out what your rules are from your counselor. Your counselor and your school counseling office, anything they say takes preference precedent over what we say here. So you can't go argue with them and say, but admissions mom and Nick said, because that's not the way it works. The way they do it and the way they want to do it takes precedent over this. However, if they're open to extra information, for sure give it to them. It's not going to hurt to try if you ask and they haven't said, like, oh no, you have to use this form.
Yep.
So and you will have access to that form. It'll be in the notes later in the slideshow, so that's for sure there. And then, so this is the next one about who writes the letters of recommendation. So we have the academic ones, and I'm going to just put, we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to put Nathaniel's question here. I've seen people say you want a letter from a STEM teacher and a humanities teacher. Would you agree? It shows the whole academic side of a person, since STEM and humanities take such different skills. We talked about that a little bit. And I do have to say that I generally recommend considering that, especially if you're even remotely thinking about applying to MIT. However, I think, like Nick said, it kind of depends on your major and what your interests are. And my own kids did not do that, by the way. So let's see, Nick, let's talk about that though a little bit. Like who and which teachers to ask. Like how do kids figure that out?
Great question. So well, the way this is exactly how we advise our students, and I've done this at every high school I've worked at. So you say, okay, you can come to either myself or my colleague, who's the other college counselor, or the administrative assistant, who's awesome and great, and I've trained her. So the first question is always, okay, who are you going to ask? Teacher A, teacher B. The student will say, tell me about teacher A and teacher B. And again, if they both said junior year, done. All right, great. But sometimes, again, getting to Nathaniel's point about what does it matter what major it is. I certainly had colleagues in admissions who really really paid attention to that. I didn't as much. Maybe that's kind of why I'm kind of like, it's fine. But I think to your point, Carolyn, like if you do have a STEM teacher and you do have a humanities teacher that does show a diversity in thought, like Nathaniel.
Mhm.
But at the same token, like if you're an engineer, I want to see math and science, and it doesn't mean like, well, I had a math teacher and I had an English teacher and therefore I can't get into engineering, but just that's kind of skill set that you're looking at. So there's a rating that a lot of admissions offices use, which is called it's called different things, but we used to call it like the school fit rating. Like how do they fit into this undergraduate college they're applying to? So that's kind of where you would see that. But after we've given our approval, you may ask teacher A, you may ask teacher B. Then I tell students, and this is important. And I got to tell you, I remember vividly doing this in high school myself, and my heart was beating out of my chest. So I'm not trying to minimize it, but I'll just tell you this a little behind the scenes and working at a school. The teachers know you're going to ask if they're a junior year instructor, especially. They know. And I can tell you, every school I've worked at, this is the teacher who gets 20 requests. This is the teacher who are like this is the one. I mean, there's all that stuff, but you find a time to talk to them in person, preferably, and privately, and you just say, hey, can I just talk to you for a few minutes before class, after school, before school, and say, as you know, I'll be applying to college next year. I was hoping I could count on you writing a letter of recommendation and support. I really liked your class, and here's why, and this really opened my mind. And then after they will say yes. I mean, it's very, very, very rare a teacher will say no. And they're going to write nice things about you. It's not like a report card home, cackling on you or anything. But a huge piece of advice I give to students when you are filling up that brag sheet, teacher recommendation form, whatever, don't make it lame. Don't say things like, I like math because I like solving puzzles. Like talk about how the Fibonacci sequences blows your mind. Like what did this open you up to? I thought I understood this moment in history, but after having a class, I'm seeing it in a totally different light. Or I didn't think I would like Sense and Sensibility, but my goodness, it's such a great book. Those sorts of things. So we actually kind of like give a once over before we submit to the teachers, because otherwise I, as the college counselor, get an email from the teacher. Oh my God, little Jimmy's form. It's so.
Wait, Nick, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. I'm having a really hard time hearing you. Would you mind getting a little closer to the mic?
Oh yeah.
You're giving such amazing information. I don't want them to miss it.
Yeah. So anyway, what I was saying is make your teacher recommendation form or brag sheet as specific as possible, because I'll look it over, as a college counselor before I submit it to the faculty member, because the faculty member was going to email me next and say, oh, this wasn't really helpful. So you want to make it as specific as possible. Anecdotes and stories, nouns and verbs communicate a lot more than adjectives do.
Yeah, great advice. And I'm going to just add in a couple of things. If your teacher does say no, and it happens occasionally, I mean, I've talked to kids, that's fine. That's a good thing. Honestly, if somebody's going to say no about doing it, you don't want their letter of recommendation, because it's not going to help your application. So don't take it personally. Usually it's because they have too many letters to write, or they don't feel like they can address you in a way to be able to really help your application. So fine, go find another teacher who does feel like they can do it. And the other thing, Nick, there are so many kids right now, especially after coming off 2 years in the pandemic, where they just really still have this like intense social, I can't remember the word, but just like being nervous about talking to people in person. Or they're socially introverted, or like, is it okay if they send an email and then maybe follow up with a thank you in person?
Yeah, I think most teachers would be absolutely fine with that. I mean, and especially because I think they do realize that, and that's something that we talk about at all division. I'm at a K through 12 school, so we talk about how that's affected them. And the other thing that you just reminded me, Carolyn, it's a really good point. Some of these faculty members get bombarded.
Right.
And so here's the other thing, students. This is one of the things I do with my faculty. My students my rising seniors are asking for letters now.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing that is if I've been asked by a student and I want to write about them in May, I can do that, or June or July. You get the idea. And also, as a college counseling director, I can call up the teacher and go, "Hey, we asked you way back in the spring. We need I know I know it's due on November 1st, but we need it quicker because the family's getting anxious, and so it's occurred. So that's the whole thing. So the way we do our recommendations is everybody had to give a little bit up and work a little bit harder earlier, but it made everyone's anxiety go down because and that's also one last thing you have to do. You may not know what you want to major in, you may not know where you want to apply, but you're gonna need these letters. So
Yeah, right. Nathaniel says, and I thought I was early asking right before summer. LMAO. So, I've been working with my students right now on asking for their letters and thinking about who they're going to ask and kind of writing out their brag sheets and their cheat sheets of like the information that they want to share and the anecdotes and stories that they want to share. And when I say working with them, that means I'm just asking them questions and then they're writing it all out. But I do think that like this is the time. I also want to say, though, that I think there's a lot of teachers, even if you ask them now, they're not going to write it before the fall. So don't get anxious if they haven't done it. Don't get anxious if they don't use their summer break to work for you. A lot of teachers will wait until the very last minute to write their letters. It doesn't mean it's not going to be a great letter. And also, it would let your college counselor be the bad guy in bugging them about it. You can just send like a quick reminder, and we'll talk about more about this in the fall when we're talking about like fall reminders and things. But you can just send a quick reminder in October. Hey, thanks so much for writing a letter of recommendation for me. If you haven't gotten it yet, just want to let you know that I'm so excited to be applying to blank, 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 early decision or early action, and so just like a little more excited about the whole process. And yay, I'm glad you're on my team. And don't get super anxious about those letters. And the other thing, Nick, I think a lot of people really get nervous about, and I'm just going to throw this in here right now. For most colleges, and maybe every, but I don't want to say that, you submit your application without worrying about that letter of recommendation. It might not get there at the same time. And that's most colleges have grace for that, right?
yeah, you absolutely read my mind. So my seniors this past year in the fall were obsessed with a capital obsessed about are my recs being sent?
Mhm.
When will they be sent? When will they be sent? And we use a software called Score. And some of you might use Naviance or Maya Learning. It's kind of Coke and Pepsi. Score is a better mousetrap, as I've said. But I must have said easily 12 times a day, if your list is up to date and Score, we know what to do. You don't have to ask us, you don't have to send it. And Carolyn's absolutely right. So going back to like when we had files that were printed out, admissions officers always call application files internally. But when we had files that were printed out, when I was working at Vanderbilt, we had a mail room in the bottom of our office. Yeah, if you think of a mail crate, just a standard size box, uh, imagine 50 or 60 of those arriving every day for weeks. And we'd get the frantic call, oh my God, do you get my mail? And we go, probably. So here's the thing. This is a really hard thing. I think like because I mean if I'm thinking I'm sitting here thinking, if you told me this, if I'm a rising senior right now or a parent, I'm like, oh no. But they're trying to complete the application. They're trying to get everything done. So it's not like you sent it the night before and they're waiting for it and oh you missed it by 10 minutes. Like they're
Mhm.
not doing that. Most places, and I don't want to say this too loudly, the students applying are not that strict about the deadlines. They're looking, you got to look at it from their point of view. They want to have those applications, they want to have a complete file. So if something's missing, like that's not a ding. I've never once in, again, almost 20 years of doing this, had a student get denied because a rec letter was late. Like that's not.
And do not wait to send your application until those letters of recommendation are in. That's comes up over and over and over on the subreddit applying to college, where I'll have kids contact me and say, "Hey, I can't send my application because my letters of recommendation aren't in." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. You send your application." Like, and then send an email saying, "Hey, I'm so excited. I just submitted my application." Thank you so much for supporting me on this journey. And that's just a subtle reminder, and you're including them in what's exciting for you too. So, but definitely do not wait to submit your application. I'm going to say this now for those of you who might be watching this in the fall, and especially.
So quick thing on that too. students, when you do submit your application, and it depends, the demanding answer to everything in the college process is it depends.
Right.
But when you send your application, sometimes the colleges think they're being really helpful.
Yes.
A lot of angst because they'll go, "Oh, thank you so much for applying. We're so excited. We need this and this and this and this." Now, here's the thing. As I said to the seniors, if your list and score is up to date, we know what to do. Chances are very good they already have that stuff because
Hmm.
your credentials electronically. I just go click. That, I mean, it literally takes like a second, So don't panic about that. Again, they're like, "Oh, you did this. Here's what's next," but that stuff may have already been in the pipeline, so or they haven't processed it yet. Because as Carolyn had said, put your part in first. Everything else can come later.
Right. And I do want to encourage you though to make sure you're checking those portals,
Yep.
checking those emails. Don't ignore them, because if you're finding a week or two later after you've submitted that things aren't there, you do need to follow up and make sure that everything is kind of copacetic and it's working, and that everything is there that you need. And just check in with your counselor and say, hey, like I think I did everything I was supposed to do, but there's colleges saying they're missing some things. So maybe I didn't get something right, and what do I need to follow up on? Those,
Absolutely.
those
If,
portals are important.
yeah, if a college sends you, "Hey, we're missing something," they're not saying we're not admitting you. They're saying we're just missing something.
Right. Yeah.
But I will say this is now. I will give one horror story. I had a very, very bright student applying to Northwestern, and apparently they had sent him 3 emails that he hadn't submitted his test scores from
Eh,
the college board. And I called our rep, who's a very nice officer, and I just said, "Well, can I unofficially give you his scores over the phone?" Because I thought he had a pretty good shot. And he said to me, "Nick, you don't understand. We're mailing in an hour." And I'm
wow.
like, and it was weird. So I told his when his parents were like, "How did this happen?" And I said, we've talked about like students are responsible for their scores. Northwestern reached out to him 3 times, and the parents, to their credit, they said, "Well, lesson learned."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are hard lessons to learn, but they are definitely lessons to learn. Nathaniel says, app deadline is on you. Rec deadline is not. If your teacher's late, it's not your fault, and colleges know this. Exactly right, Nathan. Okay, so this is still more about who, and this is something you alluded to. Ask teachers who know you best as a student, not necessarily the teacher who gave you the highest grade. So pick teachers who know you well. It doesn't have to be a class you aced. It needs to be a teacher who's familiar with your learning style and can speak to your motivation, performance, willingness to engage with the subject. I'm just like reading off of my own thing there, but I think that that's kind of basically just what I want to say about that. And any other hints about like the kind of teacher to think about as we're kind of finishing up about the who here?
So think about like it depends on your school community, depends on size, depends on the school culture, but oftentimes faculty wear other hats. So maybe your teacher is also a club sponsor or a coach.
Oh yeah.
It was so actually my immediate colleague right now, one of it was actually a student in my caseload. She said, "I want you to put this in her rec letter. She's one of the only students I would trust with my infant daughters." And I went, "That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
like so you can get that now. Now here's the other thing too. When you think about like the having too many letters, like we were talking about that a little bit earlier.
Mhm.
Here's what I do with students all the time, because we also don't want the faculty writing 4 letters for every student when 2 will suffice. So they'll say, "Oh, but so and so." So this is how I get around. I was talking about the 7th grade teacher who's the second mom.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, "Let me get a quote from her."
Oh.
So sometimes what I'll do in my letters, I call it my crab cake paragraph. I go, "But don't ask me, ask her teachers. Teacher A says dot dot dot, and more can be found in Teacher B's classroom." And then we're on the soccer field. So that way they're getting this chorus of different opinions and voices in it, but they're not submitting 9 rec letters. So that typically will work out pretty well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as students, I could see that you could kind of enable that to happen by collecting some of those quotes yourself, maybe somehow. I'm not sure how to do that, but might be something to consider. And certainly for counselors, if you're watching this, that could help. I want to put this pro tip that I have at the end here just so I don't forget it, because this is also something that comes up over and over. I get a letter or a DM from somebody saying, oh my God, admissions mom, my counselor, my teacher wrote the letter to Penn, and they talk about how imperfect fit for Penn in the entire letter. We didn't know that it was going to every college. So please know this. The letters that your teachers write are going to all of your colleges. They shouldn't make it specific to one college. Have you had that come up at all?
Oh yes, it's because where your children went, there is a teacher I tremendously liked, and we had this conversation every year. And it was actually funny. So right before this, I was actually talking to one of my rising seniors, and this very topic came up. It's so funny you say this. So anyway, he was asking about like literally the teacher recommendation forms we've been talking about, and it said something. There was one of the questions on the one he has for his high school that says something to the effect of like, uh, what do you want to contribute academically? What do you want to contribute extracurricularly? He's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And I said, well, just, and this is going to sound really weird because I'm going to tell you two different sort of approaches here. Many of the really selective colleges are going to ask, why us? Why are you applying
Right.
here? That's a whole nother lecture. But here's the thing. When I was at Penn, my dean used to say, does this person want to come to us because of what we have to offer, or they are applying here because it's Penn? And so
Mm-hmm.
on those why us, that's where I say name drop professors, programs, buildings. You know, they everyone has study abroad. What study abroad program do they have that you like? But when you're doing a teacher recommendation form, just generally, you just want to say, I want to join the a cappella group. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be abroad in France, whatever the case is, because you don't want that teacher putting that name down. It doesn't move the needle. It's not like the college mentioned they're going to go, oh, whoa, he loves
Yeah.
that. That's not, it doesn't move anything. And again, as Carolyn pointed out, I want to send that to every single college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
So that's just something that if we can prevent that from happening, that's great. And let's go back to now. We've talked about the academics a lot, the academic teachers, these supplemental letters, and you mentioned some people. What are your favorite people who students might want to consider if they're thinking about who can add something a little bit different to me?
So this is great. So if you're going to have a supplemental letter, it can certainly be a school community member. It can be, a teacher maybe you didn't ask, or a teacher who maybe does like, the service learning. That could be, part of it. Their homeroom advisor. But
Mm-hmm.
as we said, if you have a summer job or a part-time job during the year, that's great. Maybe you volunteer a lot in your house of worship if you choose to worship. That
Mm-hmm.
too. The parents you babysit for, that's kind of a fun one that's come up. There have been, and it's not as common. Well, it never really was that common, but it could also be just your friend. Honestly, like from your best friend. Like, what do you like? As long as it's adding something new. Now, Carol and I were talking a little bit about this. A question I get all the time, and I imagine Carolyn, you do as well. We know someone who's really influential,
Yes.
and or they're an alum. Would a letter from them help? And the answer is really, this is what I've always kind of subscribed to, is that like it's hard to know how influential they are. Like, there are
Mm-hmm.
alums and there are alums, but a lot of alums think they're an alum, but they might just be an alum, and there's no way for us to gauge it. But I also would say it depends on who's writing the letter. So when I had my territory of Vanderbilt, I had Virginia. So I had a lot of kids who were on Capitol Hill, and I used to always joke about my autograph collection. And you'd get senators, Congress people, whoever. They'd say, "Well, I don't know, Carolyn. My staff tells me she's great." And I go, "Okay." Um, so I had a student who worked for a mayor of a major city, and he's like, "Would it help if I got a letter from the mayor?" And I said, "Does she know you?" And he's like, "Well, not like her chief of staff does." I go, "He should write the letter. It's
Mm-hmm.
not her title. It's about who it is." So all of that to say, like, it's hard to know, but if they don't know you well and they're starting off, well, I don't know him, but I'm influential, take my words seriously, that's not as compelling as someone who actually knows you. So with
Right.
my mayor kid, chief of staff and him worked a lot. That was a better letter.
Yeah, and that brings to me to one of my students that I've been working with lately who really is interested in public policy. she's not involved in really anything in her high school. That's not her thing. But she is involved in tremendous amounts of city politics in her city where she lives, like all over the place, just like doing this and that. And I really feel like for schools that are going to accept a supplemental letter of recommendation for someone like her, it's going to be essential
Yeah.
that she gets some of her bosses in there, because her academic letters of recommendation are probably not going to really tell the whole story of who she is. They're going to tell the story of her in the classroom, and she's a good student, but it's not going to show like this depth of like this passion that she has for public policy and, wanting to, and actually actively making changes in city politics herself. And so like people like that, and the other people I really suggest you got, if you're interested in business, first of all, I think you should have a job if you're interested in business, and you should have your boss write a supplemental letter, ask them if they will. Or if you have your own business, then somebody who you've sold something to or created something for. So I do think those supplemental letters of recommendation can be important depending on kind of your goals, as you move forward. If you're a super academic kid, then probably not as important. And I think that's it from this one. So let me go see if I can jump on and get Carly. Do we have the other one ready? And I'm going to take this one up and let's see if it's ready to go. I'm going to add, because I just want to see what we have here. I'm going to remove that one. And I don't know how to do it. Can you do it, Carly? I think the next questions though, Nick, and we might just be able to kind of go over them as we're finishing up here anyway. Carly, don't worry about it. I think we can just talk about them. So Nick, the next question, I think the big thing that I want to talk about to the kids is when to ask. And I think we've talked about that. Basically now, unless your school has another formula, if your school is saying, don't ask until the fall, then don't ask until the fall. They have their own way of doing it. But if they're not saying anything at all, which I think a lot of big public schools probably don't really have much protocol, then I would start asking now and certainly start thinking about it and writing up like why you're thinking of these teachers. And then the other thing I have in the next slideshow, the second slideshow that will be on the notes for y'all, is I have cheat sheets with questions, and Nick has already talked about quite a few of them, but questions for you to ask yourself about your experience in the classroom, why this teacher, but also like which was my favorite module of learning in this classroom? What was the most difficult part of this class, and how did I overcome it? Why am I smiling when I think about this class? Lots of questions like that. And Nick, why don't you throw some out too, since we don't have the ones to look at?
So I'll tell you, this actually reminded me of something. So at my current school, we have a wonderful science teacher. I mean, awesome. She's got a following, a fandom, and all this stuff. But I can't tell you how many students were referencing the same shark dissection lab in their. I have two theories. Perhaps this was just the greatest lab ever, and they all loved it, and it was so cool, awesome. But I also kind of suspected and detected that they're like working on their college counseling homework together. Would you put? So
interesting.
The teacher rec form is not about filling it out. It's not busy work for the college counseling office.
Right.
Your chance to tell them, what it is. So I would say, like, what is your favorite lesson, or the thing I really learned in your class that really changed my views on things was as follows. So stuff like that, like, and teachers gush over that. They're like, oh, this is so great. That was inspiring.
Right.
Trying to do that. And again, if you know them in another context, like if they were if they were a homeroom advisor or a club or whatever, you can talk about that stuff too.
Yeah, and I think that you're bringing up a really good point of, we talk a lot in college about admissions about what you can control and what you cannot control. And there's so much. And I think what makes college admissions so stressful in many ways is that so much of it is out of your control. And while you cannot control what the teachers actually write, you can control what you share with them about your experience in the classroom. And more than likely, teachers are going to be happy to use those anecdotes and stories and experiences that you share with them. So this is a time when you are the Uber driver. You're the one getting yourself to where you want to be. And by taking the time to really be thoughtful, be mindful, and thinking about your experiences, and not just, like you said, filling it out just to get it done, that's not going to be really that helpful. But
Yeah.
filling it out with like really like thinking about what you want to share about yourself and then sharing with that the teacher, you have control over that. And this is a time when you can take control. And I think you have to take advantage of those in college admissions, those times when you have control. So this is one of those times as you're thinking about it, asking early, sending your stories that you want to share, thinking about who you are as an applicant and how you want to share that. And then, maybe sending those little subtle, excited reminders is something else you can control. Can we talk a little bit about the FERPA?
Yes. Okay.
Can you explain what that is and what they need to do with it?
Yes. So FERPA is what's called, this is way more than students need to know, but just in case you're wondering, it's an acronym, stands for Family Education Rights Privacy Act. And it was actually passed by the US government, I want to say 70, 79. I could be totally off about that. Only a history major here, but you think I'd know that. But anyway, so what it basically says is that you have a right to see your educational record. So here's how this plays out in the college process. So basically, letters of recommendation are unofficially confidential. So what do I mean by that? So the FERPA, I as a counselor, Carolyn as a counselor, ethically cannot tell you you have to sign the FERPA, which says you're waiving your right to see your letters of recommendation. But what I always tell students is, even though I can't tell you to do that, I will share with you, I've never had a student not do that. And this gives the colleges the confidence that you trust what they're saying, all stuff. Now, again, I know this is like, it's a report card. What are they going to say? Also, I am assuring you, out of 21,000 rec letters, I had 5 that were negative. They weren't even that bad. So students, they're going to write what they want you to get in. They're educators. They want you to aspire to more education. So it can be nerve-wracking, but again, I can't say waive your rights. I can't say I've never had a student. So that's kind of how that plays out. So it's kind of a wacky thing, in the college process. And also, I will say, I have heard anecdotes where, for some reason or another, a letter was shared with the family, and part of the reason it's confidential is there is nothing on earth that we could write that would possibly explain how wonderful the student is to every college the way the parents want. That's a big part of it. But I mean, honestly, students, like, breathe easy about this. And to Carolyn's point, you can't control what they write, but you can control what they might talk about. You can have some influence there in these forms and documents.
So we do recommend that you sign this form, right? And agree to waive your rights. And I think that's important, especially for my international students for whom they don't really have a college counselor who understands this either. So you do want to waive those rights. It kind of sounds counterintuitive, maybe. But I have seen on some of my college counseling forums where somebody will say, hey, I have this family that's refusing to waive their rights, college admissions officers. Are you going to consider their letters of recommendation seriously? And usually the answer is like, probably not. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, again, it is so once in a blue moon rare that this
Mm-hmm.
occurs. And honestly, I've had a couple of students who, like, because they would do it electronically on Score and Naviance or whatever, and a lot of times they just didn't realize,
Right.
or maybe they just didn't get it or whatever. So but I do know about the families who will dig their heels in. But honestly, if that's not signed in admissions, like, that is going to be brought up. There is no way I wouldn't have noticed that. Does that mean you're not getting it? I'd probably call the school because it's so rare.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I noticed that they didn't sign the FERPA. And now the counselor very well might come back and say, oh my goodness, no, they didn't mean to. Oh, they're so sorry. Like, it might just be a big misunderstanding, but it is so uncommon that occurs, but there's no way that wouldn't be picked up on and questioned. And again, as I'm telling you from experience, they're going to say nice things about you. And most faculty are, sort of savvy, and I don't know if that's the right word, but diplomatic enough to say, you know what, you might ask somebody else.
Yeah. Smart. So, and then another question that comes up a lot, especially with international students, is the teacher will say, write the letter, I'll sign it. What do the kids do in that case?
Yeah, that hurts my counselor heart.
But it happens.
Yeah, it does happen, and I mean, and it's actually I hear that more often with the grad students I've worked with, where the professor's like, "Oh, just write a letter and I'll sign it."
Mhm.
So it makes me uncomfortable. I wish they weren't being put in that situation because like, on one hand, like that's not what you want. That's not ideal. That's not even ethical, I'd argue. But like, what's a student to do? And it does come up because the American admissions process is wacky compared to the rest of the world, and it doesn't always translate exactly as that. And I remember too, like I had one teacher, Rec. I'll never forget. He started off. He's like, "Dear admissions colleague," right? And then he put, I've been writing these for 25 years. I have no idea what good they do. Anyway, let me tell you about so and so. And I thought to myself, I was like, I get it. I
Yeah.
get that they're not, understand. And so we do lots of essay workshops. Again, for those of you who are counselors or even students, hey, give this video to your counselors. Like Vanderbilt letters of recommendation on YouTube. Doesn't matter. It's not Vandy specific, but like it's really, really good advice that just kind of explains what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I have in the notes that you'll get along with the video, I have a whole list of resources that are just for college counselors. Some that I've collected from in the Rice class that I took about letters of recommendation, and some that I've just collected over time. Georgia Tech has a really great one. There's a whole, and for those of you, and here's what I suggest to you: if your teacher is saying, I don't have any idea how to write a letter of recommendation. I've never done it before for whatever reason. My English isn't that great, whatever reason they don't want to do it. Before you agree to write the letter for them, try sharing these resources with them and pick a few. Like I wouldn't give them 10 different resources. It sounds like that Vanderbilt one that Nick is suggesting is great. And I'm going to make sure that's on my list also. But pick a couple to share with them and say, would you mind just like reading these, learning about these? I'll give you lots of information about why I love your class and then see if we can do this together. But I think helping your teachers along if they're nervous about it, maybe you have a new teacher and they've never done it and they're nervous too. So kind of acknowledging that and giving them the support they need can also be really great for you. And you're helping them and future students. So, any last minute tips you can think of? I'm sure there's tons of things we've left off, but as we're rounding out our time here, any last minute things you can think of that we want to make sure we say?
I would say the main highlights about this: ask early, as we discussed. Make sure you do a good job in those teacher rec forms. Don't do it with your friend. And it's not about your competing with each other. It's not at all what I'm saying. Just
Mm-hmm.
what'd you put for number 3? I put this. You don't want to do that. Don't go crazy asking too many, and don't worry about this. Really, I mean, it sounds really scary, but I'm telling you, like the teachers say beautiful things about students. Like full abilities. I mean, you get that stuff. So it's a part that can be nerve wracking because you don't know what they're saying or whatnot. But just trust that if they're agreeing to write for you, they're going to advocate for you. Oh, and the last thing I would say, students, please, not just your teachers, but also your college counselor, please tell us your results.
Aha.
And
Yes.
also, like I don't
And the people who you know online who help you, let us know too.
tell people who helped you, who support you. You're curious to see where you got in. They're curious to see where you're going. A little Starbucks gift card doesn't hurt either. A nice thank you note. I have gotten some unbelievably thoughtful, and I'm not saying you have to give them a gift either, but just a thank you note in and of itself. But I've gotten some really thoughtful things from families. Like one family donated to a charity that they knew I liked in my honor. So it's just little things like that. But even like so, in Cincinnati, Grader's ice cream is a real big deal. So the kids always give $10 gift cards to Grader's. Buy them ice cream one night. Cool. Like. But again, nice thank you note doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and that is one of the points I have in my notes is being sure to thank them. And I like your idea of, just a nice personalized thank you note is great. If you can't afford to do a Starbucks card or ice cream, don't worry about that. They won't think less of you. If you can, great. They would love that. Some people bring little plants or whatever it is that, kind of feels right to you as a thank you. And I also kind of keeping them involved in the process, with the reminders, or just wanted to let you know I just submitted. I'm so excited, like letting them, they've gone to bat for you. So letting them know that like they're a part of this process with you can be really helpful. I read essays for kids, and just like when they reach out to me and say, hey, I just submitted, I'm so excited. Like, I'm going to celebrate that, like with them. So it's not only just about where you get in, but like where you've done the work for. So I think all of that is great. And I'm so glad you brought up the thank you. That is huge. Yeah. I'm going to put that here. I'm writing your main notes at the end. Remember to thank them. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, Nick, thank you so much for being here with us again today. Can't wait to have you back sometime in the future. And you had said that you'd be okay finishing it off with our little breathing exercise today. And so that would be amazing, because this is Badass College Apps, where we talk about college admissions and applying to college. And then we stop and take a breath, because it's kind of stressful thinking about all these things you have to do and all the worries of it and all the moving pieces. And, that's one reason I'm doing this. And that's why I have these amazing guests who come on and share all their knowledge, because we know that you get overwhelmed. We know that it's a lot for you to be thinking about, especially those of you who are kind of on your own in this process. So we want to make sure that you kind of learn as much as you can, but we also want to make sure that you take time to stop and just like breathe and remember like what's important in life. And so Nick is going to lead us in a little 1-minute meditation mindfulness activity to finish this off today. So thank you, Nick.
All right. Yeah. So sit in a comfortable position. You put your arms on your abdomen, on your knees, whatever feels comfortable. Close your eyes if you like. And take a moment to listen to everything, whether it's someone you know or what. Focus. There's nowhere to go right now. There's nothing to worry about. You're taking a moment to just relax. And if thoughts do come into your head, that's okay. But bring it back to the breath. This is a great time to do what's called box breathing. And basically what that means is if you think about a square, how would you breathe for 4 seconds, focusing on like a little cursor going over the top of the square, making a right turn, then going along the bottom, and then at the top. Breathe. Inhale on the top, then exhale on the way down. Inhale again, and exhale again. Now when you're ready, open your eyes back up and find yourself exactly where you are.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. And thank you, Nathaniel, for sharing your tremendous help and your advice. And thank you, Nick. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next week, where we're going to be talking about dealing with the stress of like that final decisions, back to our seniors for the last time next week. So bye, everybody. I'm going to end it here, but Nick, come say hi to me on the other side. Okay.